Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video with Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge here on YouTube. Alright, today we are watching part 2 of Oversimplified's The Civil War. I'm loving this so far. Oversimplified is one of my favorite history channels out there, and I can tell it is with you guys too because you are constantly talking about it and recommending it, and I don't blame you. It's an amazing channel. So I'm excited to check out part 2. Part 1 was great. If you didn't see part 1, or at least my reaction video, I'll put a link down below. But make sure that you go to the original video. Down in the description, there'll be a link to it. So make sure, give them a like, give them the view, and of course sub. Unless you're living under a rock. I'm assuming you're subbed to Oversimplified, but if you're not, definitely be doing that, alright? Okay, and then just last thing, if you haven't subbed to my channel, I'd love to have you be a part of our community. So hit that sub button, enable notifications so you know when live premieres and live streams are, live lessons, live game streams, all that kind of stuff that I do. Alright, with that, let's go ahead and get started.
This video was made possible by Honey. Stick around to learn how you can save money when you shop online. As the Union struggle to take control in the East continued, elsewhere, the war raged on. The Confederates attempted an invasion of Kentucky, hoping the state as a whole would join them, but they were pushed back. The Indian Territory saw Native American tribes ally with one side or the other in the hopes of securing rights after the war. Along the Mississippi...
Kind of sounds like the Revolutionary War. The Revolution, different Native groups allied with different groups. One of the things, like in the American American Revolution, although it's not as relevant to this, was a lot of them joining up with the British because they said that if you help fight with the British, that they'll protect your lands. Or same thing with African Americans or slaves in the American Revolution. The British said, "Hey, fight with us, and we'll free you." Right, and that was a motivating factor for some of that. But yeah, natives were definitely probably try to side with which side do they think will protect their interests. Now, unfortunately, it's not going to end well in the end, no matter who they fought for, because Native American lands will be pushed out even further.
General Ulysses S. Grant remained one of the few Union generals scoring major victories. With his best pal, General Sherman, by his side, Grant...
Now remember, Lincoln had fired General McClellan, who was repeatedly not being aggressive enough in the eyes of Lincoln, and finally fired him and put Grant there, who's definitely going to be more aggressive. Then you see General Sherman. This guy was very aggressive, so I'm assuming they're going to talk a lot about him, but what they did, how destructive he was in the South, it's big.
Grant led his armies down the Mississippi to the Confederate stronghold of Vicksburg. Both sides knew that if Vicksburg fell, the Confederacy would be split in two, and the Confederates prepared for an intense defense of the city. But back in the East, Lincoln still wanted somebody to march south and take Richmond.
That was always such an interesting thing because...
But back in the East, Lincoln still wanted somebody to march...
Because one of the major strategies was take Richmond. That's the, de facto capital of the Confederate States of America. And it's not very far, obviously, from the lines... between the North and the South. It wasn't very far, but it was very difficult. They tried to do it early on in the war. It didn't work. It's like such a key little piece is just right there. It's so close. And if that fell, that would be a major blow, but they were never able to do it. And it's so close right there. Look how close it is to D.C.
March south and take Richmond. Having given General McClellan the boot, he needed a new man in charge. All right, Mr. President. Option 1 is General Hooker. Bit of a nutcase, but a good general. Option 2. His qualifications are his name is Burnside, and he has freaking dope-ass sideburns.
Burnside. It should have been called Burnside. Man, the thing where it's like you connect. Is there a name for that? It's like the helmet strap. I don't remember. Epic.
Say no more. So General Burnside was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac and sent south. Lincoln hoped he finally had a general who could succeed. Burnside met General Lee at the city of Fredericksburg, where he intended to rapidly cross the river and take the city. But the Union War Department was too slow in delivering the pontoon bridges, and the two sides were forced to camp across from each other, close enough to speak. Hey Yankee, ready to get your butt kicked? Yeah, right, rebel. God is on our side. No way, God's on our side. Oh, you think so? Well, why don't we ask him? Hey God, whose side are you on? Ow. Dude, uncool. With over 100,000 men, the Union Army finally launched their massive attack on the 11th of December. But by now, the Confederates had amassed their forces. During the battle, wave after wave of brave Union men marched headlong into a brutal Confederate onslaught. Even the Confederates couldn't believe what they were seeing.
They're like, rifling technologies improved up to the Civil War. This is when you start getting, it's called the mini ball, which is more of the cone-shaped bullet that you see more today. Like in the American Revolution, it was the round ones. Problem with those is they weren't aerodynamic. They would shoot and then they could spin off all kinds of places. They're very inaccurate. So now you get the combination of more of a cone-shaped bullet. They call it the mini ball. And yeah, so it's more cone-shaped, which also... and then eventually you're going to get actual spiraling technology, which I think comes a little bit more later, but still the idea of more accurate stuff, which means longer distance. So some of those older tactics, because the reason you were doing these lines and be very close in older times with older muskets was because you had to be so close to be able to be accurate. And it was very rare to actually get accurate shots with like a musket with a round ball. So you had to be close. But it looks like the Union here is using these old tactics of getting very close and lined up when they don't need to be, or they shouldn't be actually, because they can just shoot them down at that distance.
And in one moment of camaraderie, a Confederate sergeant, unable to take it, reportedly came out into the field to tend to the Union wounded. Seeing this, the Union troops held their fire. Still, Burnside and his forces were soundly defeated at Fredericksburg and forced to retreat. Lincoln's popularity and Northern morale continued to plummet, especially as the winter heading into 1863 was bad. The winter camps were rife with...
Winters are always such a big morale hit. Think about like George Washington have to go through Valley Forge, and where he got famous was because he led them through a harsh winter and bad times. And amazing deal what the elements do for a war.
Disease. The food was less than appealing. On both sides, men began to leave. Hey, where do you think you're going? I'm deserting. What? Don't you love your country? Yes, I do. And I'm trying to get back to it as quick as I can. Lincoln, ever the kind and caring man he was, spent much of his time pardoning deserters' death sentences. Oh my. Here's a 17-year-old boy sentenced to be hanged. Well, I'd better suspend his sentence. Or he'll be suspended tomorrow. What? To try to keep the numbers up, both sides had introduced conscription. There was controversy in the...
You see
what?
that?
To try to keep the...
Conscription. Conscription. Yeah, I mean, by this time in the war, I mean, you were running out of troops. It was so bloody. You had hundreds of thousands dying. You had to conscript. Conscription is draft, right? Where you basically make people join the military.
The numbers up. Both sides had introduced conscription. There was controversy in the North, however, since rich men could simply pay to have someone else fight on their behalf. Riots broke out in New York City.
Yeah, this is a big thing. That's been a big critique.
Since rich men could simply pay to have...
As long as conscriptions have been around, because it's been often been the case where you could get out of your service. In certain times, actually, in American history, again, like pay off. Sometimes you could just pay it. All right, you're off. Like there's like a fee. You could do it. Get somebody to, go for you, which you'd basically pay them off. Say, hey, go do this, and then, I don't know, pay you off, or when you get back, I'll give you something. Later on in American history, too, you could get like college deferments or something like that, which, again, is more likely to side with people that have money. So that's always been the thing that the only real people that can often get out of the military duty in wars in American history is you had to have money. Money was behind it in one way or the other, which again has been something that's been criticized heavily in American history.
Have someone else fight on their behalf. Riots broke out in New York City with enraged mobs, furious at the idea.
Top hats, even topper boots. What does that even mean? Gazzi's, Tony's Pizza. Pocket watches. Okay, anyway. Getting off track. Didn't get distracted.
An idea that many of them simply did not support. However, after so much pressure, the Union had finally begun allowing black men to enlist. And these men, knowing what they were fighting for, signed up.
Makes sense, right? It's surprising they wouldn't allow them to do that sooner, right? Because maybe these people might have motivation, especially later in the war when it was very much declared that this was much more about slavery. Hey, one thing I just got reminded of that I can't believe I didn't bring up in the last video, this just reminded me, with the Emancipation Proclamation, is how it isn't exactly what people often think. Because Emancipation Proclamation, the whole idea was it freed the slaves, but hold up. It was definitely a political move, right? And like we said, though, it's not like the proclamation went out, and all of a sudden Southern slave owners were respecting Lincoln's executive order here. That's not the case, because they don't feel that Lincoln has any authority over them. But also a very controversial thing was it freed slaves. This is the big thing you want to know. The Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves in the states that were openly in rebellion against the United States. Now, here's why I say that. If you remember back to the first video, not all slave states joined the Confederacy, right? There were still some of those border states that didn't. People found that very ironic that they didn't free the slave states in the parts that were still with the Union. Now, why would Lincoln do that? Most likely to not upset fence sitters that were still, I guess, technically pro-slavery, but were still part of the Union. They're afraid that those, if they did that, freed those slave states, even in Union states, that it would possibly get them to switch to the Confederacy officially, right? So there's a lot of irony in it, in the Emancipation Proclamation, if you didn't know that.
The war, nearly 200,000 troops, 10% of the Union Army, would be black. The valor and bravery they showed throughout, silencing critics. Okay, well, that last guy was useless. Let's try this Hooker fella. General Joseph Hooker was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac, and once again, Lincoln ordered him to move south and take Richmond. Hooker met Lee at the Battle of Chancellorsville, where Hooker had over twice the men Lee did. Lee was forced to defy all military convention and split his smaller force into two. Lee had absolutely no chance of winning, and Lee won. It was his master.
Dude, that's crazy. I mean, Lee is so famous for being such a good general, and he just won after win after win. And a lot of times at tough odds, a lot of people like to say, regardless of the sides or whatever, and Lee fighting for Confederacy, that he truly was a brilliant general, and it was the best one of all of them in the American Civil War. Although his side's going to lose, very much out of his control, which you'll probably see later on. But from what had happened, so incredibly successful. Just from a general perspective as a general.
Lee had absolutely no chance of winning, and Lee won. It was his masterpiece. Lee did suffer one significant loss during the battle, though. As his right-hand man, Stonewall Jackson, was riding back to the Confederate lines at night, the nervous Confederate troops, unable to recognize him, opened fire.
I actually didn't know this.
You boys done goofed up. Jackson died.
Killed by his own... I actually didn't know that. I know about his story. I didn't know about his death, that he was killed by, technically, I guess, friendly fire. Wow. Glad I learned that. That's interesting.
8 days later. As for Lincoln, he couldn't believe it. It was yet another loss, and Northern support continued to waver. While the Union kept on struggling in the East, out west, unconditional surrender Grant was making moves as always. In an attempt to take Vicksburg on the Mississippi, he made a series of risky and bold movements. He sent a cavalry raid and feigned Sherman north to confuse the enemy. Then, aided by a fleet of ironclads on the river, he raced his army south to cross the Mississippi. Aware that the terrain to the north was restrictive, instead, he strategically moved northeast, hitting Vicksburg's supply line and defending his rear from Confederate armies in Jackson. Once he reached Vicksburg, the Confederate defense became hardened, and Grant was forced to settle in for a month-long siege.
Railroads were such a huge part of this war. This was one of the first wars that really used them. This also brings in one of the big advantages the Union had, which was more railroads, more manufacturing in general. The early industrialization that's happening here in America was definitely more geared towards the North than the South. The South is an agrarian farming culture, where the North is a trading manufacturing culture. So naturally, railroads were a big part. And the Northern, or the Union, was able to move stuff quicker, make stuff quicker, which was a big advantage in the war, as you're going to see slowly over time.
During which time...
But you could see how important it was to take what railroads there are out there and be in control of them.
Got rather bored. Despite not taking the city, Lincoln loved it and encouraged Grant to hold firm. It would only be a matter of time before the Mississippi was in Union hands. Around this time...
That's huge. I mean, that is the super highway of the Midwest. I mean, the Mississippi is like everything. If you're not on the coast, you're relying on the Mississippi. It's how you travel. It's how stuff is traded. I mean, once you lose that, you lose your biggest connection piece.
The people in the west of Virginia, who had remained loyal to the Union throughout, finally broke away to form their own state. They could have named it anything in the world.
Wait, let's look. Kanawha, Vandalia, alternative. Big Mountain Mama State, Florida, Canada 2, Mississippi, Mississippi. High School Musical, the musical, the series, the state, left Virginia. Which one? Which one should they have gone with, everybody?
But the creative minds at the time came up with the ingenious West Virginia. Back in Washington, Lincoln once again wanted a new general to take...
I feel like if you're West Virginia, if you want to be West Virginia, you have to somehow convince the other side to be East Virginia. Otherwise, it's a Virginia, West Virginia, right? I don't know.
Command. Oh my goodness, why do all these 19th century generals look so bust? Look, we got Sleepy Eyes Joe here. That's Princess Leia with a mustache. E.T. phoned the doctor. Fine, why don't we give Snapping Turtle McGee here a shot? So General Snapping Turtle McGee was put in charge of the Army of the Potomac. And it was a crucial time for the Union, because once again, the Confederates decided to go on the attack. So far, they had done exceedingly well militarily, but as the war kept going, the Confederate economy was crumbling. Riots broke out in the streets of Richmond as the price of bread skyrocketed. Supplies were dwindling. Jefferson Davis wanted to send men west to rescue Vicksburg, but General Lee knew the longer the war lasted, the worse their chances got. And he still hoped if he could just threaten D.C., the already demoralized North would surrender. So in June 1863, with the momentum behind him, General Lee once again entered the North, fighting his way through Maryland and into Pennsylvania.
Maybe they tried this earlier but it didn't work, but yeah, this is the deepest north that they'll ever get here, heading to Gettysburg.
General Meade set out to meet him for what would be the most significant battle of the entire war. If the Confederates won, D.C. could fall. If the Union won, it would be a turning point, as the Confederates would run out of steam.
Yeah, this is a big thing because for the most part, the goal for the South has just been preserve, right? Defend and preserve. They're not looking to take over the North, unlike how the North is trying to basically take over the South. They're just trying to preserve it. So it's not like they're going in to like take over the North and control it, but deal a blow that would make the Union, the North, think that this war is not going to be successful. So maybe they should seek an end to this and let the South secede or something like that. So you can see kind of what the point is, though. But this is huge.
And the small town that was to get caught up in the crossfire of the largest battle in American history was Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. On June 1st, units from each army encountered one another and skirmished through the town itself. The townspeople were forced to take refuge, except for one man who reportedly ran outside for a strange reason. "Joseph, what are you doing?" "I'm not gonna let them take my beans." "How many times do I have to tell you they're not here for your beans?" By the second day.
Awesome. Here for his beans.
Over 100,000 men stretched for miles across the battlefield. Lee took the initiative, deciding to hit the enemy's flanks, and he came very close to breaking through the Union's disorganized left. But Union Colonel Joshua Chamberlain ordered a desperate bayonet charge, smashing into the Confederates and forcing them back. The Union forces held across the line. On the final day, Lee believed the Union Army had fortified its flanks, so he decided to finish them off with one massive central assault. The Confederates rushed at the Union lines during General Pickett's charge, and this time, it was the Union's turn to unleash hell. Meade had correctly guessed Lee's strategy, and the Confederates were decimated, forced to turn and flee. A devastated General Lee called out to his fleeing and wounded men, telling them it was his fault. And after holding for a counterattack that never came, he ordered a retreat back into Virginia. The North had...
It's right away you're showing, yeah, he's remorseful, showing him that right away, that, hey, like, you guys fought bravely. Wasn't your fault, though, so try to keep your head up high, even though, again, how emotionally you're feeling about this with the largest battle in American history.
Just managed to score a massive victory, and one they desperately needed. And if that wasn't enough, in the West, after a month-long siege, Vicksburg finally fell. The North now held the Mississippi. And better yet, it was the 4th of July. With control of the Mississippi, Union forces moved into Arkansas and Tennessee. Tennessee in particular saw heavy fighting, with Union General Rosecrans masterfully pushing Braxton Bragg's Army of the Tennessee out of Tennessee. He suffered a major setback, however, at the bloody Battle of Chickamauga, and ended up under a Confederate siege at Chattanooga. At one point during the siege, a temporary truce was declared so that wounded men could be recovered. And often in the Civil War, during these small truces, men from both sides would meet in the middle to trade things like tobacco, coffee, and maybe even honey. Do you like
Segway?
honey? Me too. Bees are great. And you know what rhymes with honey? Money. Did you know honey can help you save money? Let me explain. Honey is a free browser extension that automatically finds you the best coupon codes when you buy stuff online, for free. For example, here I am purchasing 100 pepperoni pizzas because what the heck, I do what I want. With just a click of a button, I've saved $210. Nice. Honey works with over 30,000 websites, including eBay, Target, and Expedia, and it's already found Oversimplified subscribers over $46,000 in savings. It takes just 2 clicks to install.
Is that him?
Better yet, it's absolutely,
that the guy
positively,
who does this?
100% free. Get Honey now and start saving money by clicking on the link in the description below. Joinhoney.com/oversimplified. That's joinhoney.com/oversimplified. And as always, you'll be supporting my channel, so thank you. Now where was I? Oh yeah, Vicksburg, 4th of July, and the Siege of Chattanooga. Thankfully, General Grant, now in charge of all Western Union armies, showed up and karate-kicked Bragg right back into Georgia. Like this. With Sherman and Hooker, Grant took on Confederate positions in the mountains around the city, including the famous battle above the clouds and Mission Ridge. Grant continued to be Lincoln's #1 guy. With these victories, Lincoln hoped the war was finally turning. Back in Gettysburg, the entire town had been turned into a hospital to care for the scores of wounded men. Throughout the war, on both sides, women such as Clara Barton rose to the occasion, doing crucial work on the home front and volunteering as nurses for those who had given their lives. A new national cemetery was to be established at Gettysburg, and Abraham Lincoln traveled out to attend the opening ceremony.
Oh, yeah. Well, later you're going to get the Gettysburg Address, the 7 years ago. Kind of thing, which, especially after the war, is going to become such a big piece of American history.
At the event, the main speaker spoke for 2 hours. Then, Abraham Lincoln was called forward to give some brief, appropriate remarks. In just 2 minutes, he masterfully and...
Yeah, people don't know, it was a very short thing. It's why you can memorize it. I mean, and a lot of people do. I know a lot of like classes do that. They'll, have you do it, and yeah, it's pretty memorable. You can, I mean, everyone knows like the beginning part, the whole 7 years ago, but it's really, again, not that long. If you're into that kind of thing of like memorizing, you kind of like that challenge of it, students that like to do that for whatever reason, try it.
Poignantly iterated America's national purpose and the need to continue the fight. The Gettysburg Address would become one of the most famous speeches in American history. While they were now making progress, the North still couldn't find a decisive victory in the East. And that was bad news for Lincoln, because his presidency was now in its 4th year.
Yeah, the end of this term for him, right, is huge. A lot of politically motivated decisions that are going to go into how to conduct the war. Like, for example, try to end the war before the election. Or at the very least, make sure it's going well. Otherwise, he's not going to get reelected. And he wants to be. It really does seem like that. So going aggressive here in this final year before the 1964 election.
In 1864, there was an election coming. The Confederates knew this too, and with little hope left of being able to threaten the North militarily, they believed their last shot at victory may be in the election, since Lincoln, emancipation, and the war itself weren't exactly popular. People in the North were sick of war and wanted to put it behind them. Robert E. Lee hoped that if he could just hold out and continue to inflict more defeats, the people of the North would vote Lincoln out and replace him with a Southern sympathizer who may be willing to negotiate. Lincoln knew now he desperately needed a victory. Now, I know what you're thinking, but oversimplified. If Lincoln loves General Grant so much, then why doesn't he put him in charge of the campaign in the East? Well, guess what, loyal subscriber? You've hit the nail on the head. You're bold, Grant. I'll grant you that. I'm promoting you to General-in-Chief, and I ain't taking you for granted. Now, I want you to go defeat Lee. Grant me my wish. Please stop. So Grant was put in charge, and he came up with a new plan. He wanted to press the Confederates on all fronts, with General Banks to capture Mobile, Alabama, General Sherman moving south to Atlanta, and Grant joining the Army of the Potomac as they advanced through Virginia. In May 1864, that plan went into action. Sherman steadily advanced on Atlanta, facing off against the smaller Confederate army under General Joseph E. Johnston. In addition, a cruel yet highly skilled cavalry general and
look at that goatee.
General Joseph E. Johnston. In addition, a cruel...
It goes out. It's thick. Plus the hair.
Yet highly skilled cavalry general and winner of the funniest Confederate statue award.
That's creepy. Look at his eyes. What?
Bedford Forrest was also nearby, doing his best to threaten Sherman's advance. But in a series of battles, Sherman dominated and pushed Johnson back to the city. But he was held just outside of Atlanta itself and was forced to lay siege. Meanwhile, the main show was happening to the east in Virginia. The Union's top general was finally about to face off against the Confederacies. Lincoln hoped Grant would bring something new to the Eastern Theater, and bring something new he did. As Grant began moving south, Lee still regularly outmaneuvered him and inflicted heavy casualties, hoping to demoralize the North as much as he could. But here's what set Grant apart from others. He knew Lee was running out of men and that the North by comparison had plenty. Grant would throw his forces at Lee, and even when Lee repelled them, Grant, rather than pulling back, would give the order to keep moving forward and flank Lee again and again. In under 6 weeks, 80,000 men would be killed, wounded, or missing. In D.C., Grant was criticized for being a butcher. At the Battle of the Wilderness...
But, I mean, again, a lot of this is, again, politically motivated for Lincoln, and Grant definitely followed orders. Lincoln wants this thing to be going much better. He needs it to end, because if it's not going well, he's not going to get reelected. He's going to lose his job.
Casualties were so heavy that Grant reportedly began to weep. But still, Grant could replace his losses. Lee couldn't, and he was being pushed all the way back to Richmond. Lee knew once he got there, he'd be under siege. Then, it would only be a matter of time. Close to Richmond, Grant again suffered horrific casualties in a miscalculated assault at Cold Harbor. Then, trying to be a trickster, instead of moving on Richmond directly, Grant moved towards Petersburg to flank the Confederate capital and cut its supply line. But, just like Sherman, Grant was halted outside of the city, and he too was forced to settle in for a siege. 2 identical sieges would not be good enough for Lincoln's re-election. The people of the North saw the casualties Grant had been taking, and they weren't happy. To make matters worse, Lee had sent Jubal Early north to threaten D.C., with the hope of forcing Grant to withdraw troops from Richmond. Early was repelled on the outskirts of the city, with President Lincoln even attending as an observer, but the North had been given a fright. So with the war currently in a stalemate, who was to be Lincoln's opponent in the critical 1864 election?
Sponsor Uncle Joe's Snake Oil Emporium. Yeah, I mean, man, this is such a big election, isn't it? Because this is going to decide the war. Again, logic would state that if the people aren't happy with the war, they're not going to bring Lincoln back, and they're going to bring somebody that very likely will be somebody a little bit more sympathetic possibly to the South, just because the Northern citizens might want to see just an end to this war, let the South go, whatever that is. It'd be a much more rare case to get somebody that would be even more aggressive than Lincoln was. So again, for the South, it's like just survive right now. Okay, and if you can make it look like you're winning, I mean, that's about all you're going to need to do. Possibly, you just got to wait out the storm.
Who would the Democrats choose? Guess what, baby? I'm back. That's right. General George B. McClellan would run for president against Abraham Lincoln.
So, oh, fascinating, right? Lincoln fired this guy. So, you'd have to think, what demographic of people are going to be ones that are going to support McClellan, right? Because he wasn't as aggressive as Lincoln would have wanted. So would that make people that would like to see the war be less violent or possibly end, possibly side with him? You know, maybe that would be that demographic. But you got to wonder if this is really the best pick to put up against Lincoln at this time. Somebody who might reek of failure in a way, but might also appeal to a more radical group, though. I mean, you could see that. But are moderates going to respect McClellan?
My fellow countrymen, if you elect me, I, the great General George McClellan, will fearlessly and valiantly win the war. Unlike this douchebag, many Democrats, however, including McClellan's running mate, wanted to end the war. So it's possible McClellan may have ended up fearlessly and valiantly making peace with the Confederates, which is exactly what they were hoping for. With the war in a stalemate, and Lincoln still not popular, it looked like McClellan would win, and the Confederacy may have a chance at surviving after all. Lincoln himself said that without some kind of major victory, it seemed exceedingly probable that this administration will not be re-elected. Well, fret not, Abe, because if it's a major victory you want, it's a major victory you'll get.
Sherman!
Atlanta.
Yes, man, Sherman goes just ham pretty much on the South, and it's like the most violent and most destructive part of the war. I mean, basically that's what Lincoln's going to tell him, is go in and create as much devastation as possible in the South. Just rip through places like Georgia, burn it to the ground pretty much. It's nasty.
Atlanta had been under siege by General Sherman for just over a month. After a number of battles around the city, Sherman sent a force south to sever the city's supply line, and Confederate General Hood was forced to abandon it. Atlanta, one of the Confederacy's most important cities, had fallen into Union hands. For many, it was clear that the Confederacy's defeat was now inevitable, and the war would soon be over. When the final results came in, Lincoln had won with an electoral college landslide, with the troops in particular voting overwhelmingly for Lincoln, which must have been touching for their commander-in-chief.
Now remember, especially if you're not American, if you don't know how American presidential voting works, they have what's called an electoral college. It's not a popular vote. You don't win by popular vote in America, meaning your state votes, and whatever your state votes in the highest percentage, that represents your whole state. And your state has votes that go into this electoral college system. Basically, the bigger your state is, the more votes your state gets, right? So if your state votes in favor of a higher percentage on an issue or a candidate in this case, all of your state's votes go towards that, towards the decision, right? I know people outside of America criticize it and like, why do you do this? Why do you not just do a popular vote? And it goes back to an older time of trying to compromise large states versus small states, and it's still a huge debatable thing. It has to do with mixing of states and all that stuff. So technically speaking, and this has happened in America before, where you can win the popular vote, you can get more people across the country to actually vote for you and still lose. It happened in the last election with President Trump's first time as well, and also President George W. Bush when Al Gore actually won it back in 2000. So it can technically happen. It's fairly rare, but it has happened multiple times in American history, actually.
Hey man, looks like you lost. No hard feelings? I didn't lose. I merely failed to win. In January, Lincoln involved himself heavily in ensuring the 13th
Amendment abolish slavery.
Amendment made it through Congress. In a narrow and historic vote, the amendment passed. Slavery would now be constitutionally banished throughout the nation. Black men and women, watching the vote from the galleries, knew the work had only just begun. A couple months later,
war's not over either, though. I mean, they're passing it, but the war's not over.
At his second inauguration, with victory right around the corner, he didn't celebrate, he didn't gloat. Instead, he emphasized the need for reunification and binding up wounds. To him, Americans, North or South, were to again be compatriots. However, listening to Lincoln speak that day was a man who had no interest in reunification, John Wilkes Booth. An actor living in D.C., was also a deep Southern sympathizer, and as the war turned against the Confederacy, depressed and full of hate, he was already plotting his revenge on the man he held responsible. He
was fairly popular, from what I understand. Theater was such the big form of entertainment, and like that was he's not an unknown person. It'd be like a semi-celebrity celebrity today, doing what he's about to do. If you don't know, we'll let it run, but you know what I mean.
With further Confederate losses, it was pretty clear at this point who would win. But still, Jefferson Davis showed no sign of giving in. The North...
Remember, Jefferson Davis is the president of the Confederacy.
...were frustrated to see the conflict being dragged out. Why waste more lives? In Atlanta, General Sherman believed he had the key to forcing the Confederacy's hand. He had an unusually modern concept, that an army could only survive with the support of the people. Strike at the people, and the army collapses. Sherman decided to do something unprecedented. He would remove his 62,000 men from their supply line, and march through the heartland of the Confederacy, where they would live off the land. There, they would wreak havoc. As they marched, they tore up railroads, burned farms, and destroyed communication lines. They also liberated thousands of slaves. The damage done was estimated at $1.4 billion. The tactics were...
There's a lot. Yeah, I remember that. Just go be devastating. Ruin the morale from the public.
Cruel, but to Sherman, it was better than losing yet more men in battle. In December, he reached Savannah, Georgia, but he wasn't done yet. Next, he turned north to inflict his punishment on the first state to secede, South Carolina.
It all started, right?
As he moved, he came ever closer.
First state to secede, and also the first battle, the Civil War with the battle at Fort Sumter. So it's like the most secessionist of all the secession states.
Closer to General Lee's army, still holding out at Petersburg.
So we're gonna meet back
the siege
up.
of Petersburg had lasted for 292 days.
Wow.
60,000 of
Almost
Lee's
a
men
year.
had deserted. Numerous Union attempts to break through had failed, but when the breakthrough finally came, it came quick. On April 2nd, a Union assault finally pushed the Confederates from their defenses. Hey man, there's no need to evacuate, right? You'll rescue us like last time, right? Sorry, can't hear you. Lee narrowly escaped the
Peace
city,
out.
hoping he'd be able to meet up with General Johnson and continue the fight. Grant chased him down. Richmond was evacuated, and Jefferson Davis went on the run. As they left, the Confederates set fire to military buildings, but the flames burnt out of control, and as the Union troops arrived, they became firefighters.
Gosh, they're destroying their own city. I don't know if it's like, almost like a scorched earth policy. It's like, hey, destroy all our stuff while we're out of here, but it looks like it went much further than that.
A couple of days later, Abraham Lincoln visited the war-torn city. Grant caught up to Lee at Appomattox Courthouse, where he trapped his forces.
This is it.
It was here, on April
Here it
9th,
is.
1865, that Lee saw no point in continuing. Sir? Listen, bub. I drank a bit too much last night, and now I'm hanging like a fruit bat on a hot day. So whatever you have to say, I don't want to hear it.
We won.
General Lee says he wants to surrender. Hot diggity dog! Grant and Lee met in the home of a nearby farm family, owned by a man who had tried his best to escape the Civil War.
Man, imagine being the one that hosted this. It's a big moment in history. It's your farmhouse. So I went right in the middle of a dialogue. Let me go back 5 seconds.
In the home of a nearby farm family, owned by a man who had tried his best to escape the Civil War years earlier, Wilmer McLean. All right, can we all just hurry up and get this over with? Martha, not now!
Martha again.
I'm cleaning. Do you want us to get rats? Grant and Lee, after years of war, now spoke respectfully to one another. When Lee left, his face filled with emotion, Grant's men began to cheer, but Grant ordered them to stop. He knew that now was the time for reconciliation.
Yeah, it's not time to rub it in. It's time to move on. Yeah, you can celebrate, but act like you won before, right?
Just over 2 weeks later, General Johnson would surrender to Sherman, ending the war for 89,000 Confederate soldiers in the largest surrender of the war. Not every Confederate state had surrendered, but the war was as good as over. Across the North, church bells rang out and celebrations erupted. In Washington, Lincoln gave a speech from the White House to a jubilant crowd, in which, among various things, he expressed his support for black voting rights. Lincoln had seen the nation through its deepest crisis. The presidency had visibly aged him. He had lost over 20 pounds. He said sometimes, "I think I am the tiredest man on earth." I'm not sure tiredest is a word, but geez, the man's exhausted. Cut him some slack. On a carriage ride with Mary, Lincoln clearly was looking forward to being a president in a time of peace. He was apparently very cheerful, surprising his wife, and he told her that between the war and the loss of their son, they'd both been very miserable. Now, it was time to be happy. On the evening of April 14th, Lincoln attended a play with his wife and some friends at Ford's Theater. It was a comedy, and the president appeared to be enjoying it very much. In a nearby bar, John Wilkes Booth swallowed 2 glasses of brandy. He slipped quietly into the president's booth and awaited for the audience's laughter to rise.
That's it.
The president was shot in the back of the head. Booth fled the city. Soldiers carried Lincoln.
Actually jumped off. Let me go back. But so he jumped off the balcony here. Fell down. And a lot of people, he got hurt. He jumped off and possibly broke his leg. Now there was this unconfirmed thing that he jumped onto the stage here again hurting himself. So it's like Sic Semper Tyrannis, or like Death to Tyrants, which was the I think the mythology or whatever, or something behind when Julius Caesar was assassinated. That was supposed to be said. It was Latin, but I don't know if that's been corroborated. Correct me if I'm wrong that he actually said that. But yeah, he leaves in the chaos and goes into hiding, and a massive, well, I'll let him get to it, but a massive manhunt goes on for Wilkes Booth, who just again assassinated the president right in public.
The president was shot in the back of the head. Booth fled the city. Soldiers carried Lincoln to a boarding house across the street. There, doctors declared there was nothing they could do. Surrounded by his heartbroken wife, son, and members of cabinet, at 7:22 the next morning, President Lincoln passed away. Never before had a president been murdered. A shocked nation mourned as a 12-day funeral procession carried Lincoln back to his home in Springfield, Illinois. On April 26th, Union cavalry found John Wilkes Booth in a barn in Virginia, where he was shot.
Yeah, there was a big shootout at that barn, a shootout there. So I forget how long it had been, at least like 3 days, right? I want to say. I forgot. Maybe I just glossed over, wasn't paying attention to that. But yeah, big shootout where he dies in the shootout. So they never got to like apprehend him or question him or anything.
Not long after, Confederate President Jefferson Davis was also tracked down and arrested. Imprisoned for 2 years, he was eventually released. The North didn't want to put him on trial for fear the jury may rule that Southern secession had in fact been legal.
I mean, and what's the point, right? They lost. What's the point for Davis? I mean, he's out of power now. I mean, with the wars about to be over here. Officially, it's going to be over here. Yeah, there's no point really. Plus, you could anger a lot of people in the South. That's not what you want to do right now.
To ensure reconciliation, other Confederate generals and politicians were allowed to re-enter life in the now restored Union. Scattered fighting continued into May, when the last Confederate forces in Texas disintegrated. The southern states came under Northern military occupation to prevent any further rebellion, and a very difficult era of Reconstruction began. Over 3 million Americans had fought, brother against brother.
Okay, let's look at it. 750,000 dead. So 750,000. 2/3 from disease. Yeah, still an era of where if you get a wound, you can get infected, and still don't quite have the antibiotics and stuff like that. I mean, this is the era when a lot of that is starting to be treated better, but still an era where a lot more people die of disease, especially from wounds inflicted in war than happens now. But okay, so we got 290,000. So I mean, you look, casualties are not the sign of who won. I mean, you see the Union, because they were the attackers. After they died, in higher numbers. 50,000 civilians killed, 80,000 slaves killed. Wow.
The Civil War remains the bloodiest conflict in U.S. history, but the Union had been preserved. You could say the real winners were those who were to never again be slaves. Further amendments passed by Congress gave black individuals the right to citizenship and to vote.
Yeah. So it's happened. So you get the slavery related amendments, 13, 14, 15. So 13 freed the slaves, 14th made them citizens, and then 15 allows them to vote. All within kind of a succession with each other, but
significant progress had been made. However, entering into the 20th century, it was clear the fight for equality would continue.
Yeah, what you're going to get is a lot, especially in the southern states, to make it as hard as possible to exercise these rights when they're going to enter other things that were definitely designed to hurt some of these new former African Americans that are now free, but economic rights and political rights, and kind of just really try to kind of drag the feet for a long time. It's more of a topic for another time, into the era of Reconstruction. So basically, for the next 100 years, you're going to get this civil rights movement slowly, with it peaking 100 years after the Civil War with the American Civil Rights movement, which really culminates in the 1960s through the 50s and 60s. Peaking
in modern America, the man who fought to preserve the nation and never gave up in the darkest of times stands as a symbol of honesty, empathy, humility, perseverance, and courage. A continuous reminder of what has forged America and what it should ever strive to be.
That's it. Okay. Go back to the last image. Okay. All right. Video's over. That is the last of the second part, the last part of this two-part series on the Civil War. So once again, the Oversimplified channel does doing amazing work. They add the humor and a lot of details. I'm so glad to have watched that. I don't teach American history, so it's great for, I teach it in the context. I teach right now world history type classes. And when we talk about American history, it's far more general, and especially in the scope of world history, events like the American Revolution, right? And so it's good for me to rehash a lot of this stuff that I'd learned, of course, when I was younger, or even in college and stuff like that, in the American history classes I did take, to get a little bit more of that and come back. So I'm glad to have done that and kind of rekindle a lot of those things as an American that I am, and part of the history of my nation. So this is fantastic. Again, love the Oversimplified channel. I have watched all of their videos. I've actually done reaction videos on all of them if you want to see my take on some of the other ones. Again, they go in so much more detail that I feel like with a lot of these deep, more in detail videos, I'm not able to necessarily add that much more than just my little comments and stuff like that, because they go into so much detail. But I like watching them so much, and apparently people like to see it too, because you guys seem to like the reactions to this coming from a history teacher. So I don't know if it being not specifically an American history historian matters as much to you, but it's good I can kind of go through there, even though I feel like I know all these basics with American history, of course. But anyway, thank you so much for being here. I want to plug, again, Oversimplified channel just one more time. Down below, you will see a link to this original video. Make sure you give it a like, give it a subscribe, even just the view. Type a comment with your appreciation for what he does over there. He does such amazing work, and it's just important for us to appreciate this stuff. To make sure YouTube is a place that really accepts and embraces history education. It is such a powerful tool for history education, probably the biggest educational tool we have in the existence right now. So it's important for us to support channels and things like that that attempt to share history, no matter what it is. So it was cool. I saw that on the first episode, it went trending. The first part, it was trending at like number 4 when I checked. I don't know if it ever ended up getting higher, but that's such a cool thing to have for a history channel. Of all the stuff that's on YouTube, all the other entertainment forms, to see history education up there is just, it makes me so proud to be part of the YouTube community that does have a much bigger chunk out there than people think of, people that do appreciate history, and finding these ways to make it relevant, make it entertaining for people that are deep into history, and the casual viewer itself. You Oversimplified is great at that. So yeah, make sure you support them for sure. Thanks again for watching. If you haven't subbed to my channel, love to have you around. If you'd like to get involved in our community a little bit deeper, then definitely join our Discord community. We have a few thousand right now that are members. Down below you will see a link to in the description to our server, and you can get in discussing that with all kinds of different people there. Also, if you'd like to support the channel some other ways, there's a Patreon account. Patrons are able to vote on videos that get promoted onto this channel. So membership start at $1 a month if you feel like possibly supporting that way. I appreciate that. Thanks to everybody that's done that. Thanks to people that have joined through channel memberships, which we just got in the last few weeks or so. So you can click that join button if you want to be there. Really beneficial too if you really like to be a part of our live streams, because that's where a lot of the benefits come from. And those that have given super chat donations in our live events, really appreciate that too, just for not just supporting me, but history education in general. I really appreciate that. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and end it here, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.